on the event that is being planned, because it's not just an IOM event, but it is an event with many other agencies as well. So, and I'll get to that in my opening remarks. So again, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for making the time and attending this important event to mark also International Women's Day. And thank you very much for joining this specific IOM Spotlight session to mark International Women's Day for 2023. As you know, and as we mentioned in our invitation, the theme of International Women's Day on the 8th of March of 2023 is Digital Innovation and Technology for Gender Equality, which recognizes the contribution of women and girls around the world who are championing the advancement of transformative technology and digital education and exploring the digital gender gap. Technology and innovation have the potential to advance gender equality and support women and girls worldwide. The digital empowerment of women is central to realize their rights, as digital technologies can facilitate access to education, information, and expand access to social and economic opportunities. Yet, the digital gender gap prevents women and girls from becoming both developers and consumers of technology, perpetuating inequalities. The inclusion of women is crucial to ensure that their concerns and experiences are integrated in the design and the development of products and services, and to address the global challenge of the 21st century. While the technological developments provide incredible opportunities to advance gender equality across sustainable development goals, unequal access to technology, as we've mentioned just now, lack of digital skills, and digital gender-based violence and abuse are challenges that must be addressed. Transformative technology and digital education must thus be inclusive and safe to ensure the sustainable future where women and girls can fully realize their potential and also as leaders. Contributing to examine the opportunities as well as the constraints to empower women and girls to have a voice and be equal players in decision-making related to technology and innovation is essential for sustainable development and greater gender equality. To this end, the Gender Focal Points group of the Vienna-based organizations are committed to contributing to gender equality and women's empowerment, and together this week we have a joint initiative to celebrate International Women's Day. How diverse Vienna-based organizations' mandates may be, and they are diverse, innovation and technology for gender equality are relevant for all the work of the UN and central to our work here in Vienna and beyond. The Vienna-based organization's Gender Focal Point group believes that this year's International Women's Day theme provides us a unique opportunity to highlight the nexus between the mandates of the entities and innovation, technology, digital education, gender equality, and the empowerment of women. And we will be examining those in today's session, as will the other agencies do in their respective sessions. In this specific spotlight session by IOM will focus on remittances and financial inclusion of migrant women in line with SDG 10 and Objective 20 of the Global Compact of Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration. IOM Regional Office Vienna Labor Mobility and Social Inclusion Coordinator, Maria Basserman, who you see on the screen now, will examine the barriers women migrants and remittance recipients face accessing financial digital services and highlight initiatives that aim at reducing such barriers. In the next 45 minutes or so, our IOM expert will explore remittances through a gender lens and examine the inequalities in financial inclusion, how digital services can enhance financial inclusion of women, migrants, and remittance recipients, and practices, examples, and lessons learned from Central Asia and Eastern Europe, which is the region covered by this regional office in Vienna. Maria Basserman is the Regional Labor, Mobility, and Social Inclusion Coordinator on IOM's regional office in Vienna. covering Southeast Europe, Eastern Europe, and Central Asia. Before that, she worked as a project coordinator in the Labor Migration and Inclusion Unit as a research associate in the Research and Migration Law Unit of IOM Austria, and supported the Office of Gender as a gender focal point. She studied migration and intercultural relations, amongst others, in Germany and Uganda, as well as social and cultural anthropology at the University of Vienna. Without any further ado, I'm very pleased to hand over to Maria. Maria, the floor is yours for your presentation, and thank you very much for being here with us today. Over to you.
Good morning, good afternoon. And welcome from my side as well to this event. I'm very glad to be here to support this initiative. I'm just waiting to share my presentation for a moment. Can you see my presentation, Amre?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Let's dive in directly into the topic, I would say, enhancing financial inclusion of women migrants and remittances recipients through digital services. Here is what we will be talking about in the next couple of minutes. So we'll explore remittances through a gender lens. Then we will zoom in a bit more on digital services and how they can enhance final inclusion of women and migrant recipients. And then we'll look at practices and examples and lessons learned from the SECA region, so Southeastern Europe, Eastern Europe, and Central Asia. Okay, so exploring remittances through a gender lens. Here, I wanted to start off with a few points about the role of remittances in development to showcase also how inequalities remain not only stable, but may increase if gender is not considered in policies, measures, or projects addressing the topic of remittances. So you know that remittances are multidirectionally, they are voluntary and private international monetary transfers that migrants make individually or also collectively to people with whom they maintain close links, so family, friends, etc., in the countries of origin or the communities of origin. So remittances, and this is something you may know, are often the most direct and well-known link between migration and development. And remittances can also support resilience recovery in communities and countries of origin. I'm not sure if you know this, but remittances are the largest source of external financial flows to low and middle income countries, other than China, I have to say here. And remittances to low and middle income countries have been about 3 times the volume of official development assistance for more than a decade now. So in the introduction, Ambre mentioned the digital gender gap and how it prevents women and girls from becoming both developers and also consumers of technology, including in the financial sector, and thereby increasing inequalities. And I think if we look at these facts, so the importance of remittances in development in low and middle income countries, I think it highlights a bit the importance of the topic of including a gender aspect or including gender considerations in remittances, but also in digital financial inclusion. Okay, so this is a bit of a start here. I've brought you some numbers so that we know a bit about what we talk here. So in 2022, remittances flows to low and middle income countries are estimated to have reached 626 billion US dollars. This is an increase of 4.9% to compare to 2021. Just a note, so for 2022, we still have only estimations, and the 2023 numbers are, of course, forecasts, which always have to be corrected, both estimations and forecasts. Maybe let's have a look quickly at the most important countries. On the left side, you see the top 5 countries in the inflows in US dollars. So here we have India at the top, followed by Mexico, China, the Philippines, Egypt, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Nigeria. And on the left side, we have remittances in terms of the share of gross domestic product. And here we see that smaller economies are among the top countries. And we also see here that we have on the 4th and 5th place 2 countries from our region, which are Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, with 32 and 31% of their GDP. So this also highlights the importance, especially to Central Asian countries, of remittances. Okay, so this is enough of a general introduction to remittances. You may wonder why I do not show these numbers disaggregated. Unfortunately, on a global level, they don't exist. Numbers on remittances also do not, or these numbers I'm showing you, or these statistics I'm showing you, also do not include informal transfer, which still have a large share. And I also wanted to mention that remittances may be of social nature as well. So it could be ideas, behaviors. So we're focusing here really on the financial flows, but remittances can also be considered a bit broader, just as a note here. So how does gender influence remittances? How is this an influencing factor? First of all, it's important to note that there is a lack of research about the influence of gender on remittances, despite the fact that gender influences remittances usage and sending. So which channels do people use? How often do they send money? All these kind of considerations are different when we look at women and men, the differences between women and men. So the first point is women tend to remit a larger share of their income than men, although female migrants on average earn, of course, less than male migrants, since we still face a gender pay gap in many, many countries around the world. So what does this mean in practice? So the amount that female migrants send per transaction is usually smaller because they have a lower income, and they send money more often. This also means that they lose more money to transfer fees than male migrants. So these are the small things you can, which increase inequalities, because obviously women then lose more money when sending remittances. Another difference is the method, the transfer method. So female migrants use more often informal methods than men. This has to do with the fact that female migrants have a lower access to bank accounts and financial services and technology, money transfer services. This is something we will focus on later a bit more. It has also to do with lower education levels and a reluctance on the side of the banks to open bank accounts of female migrants. And here we obviously see the factor discrimination or based on gender playing into this whole differences, into the differences between men and women. So men and women also have different recipients. So men usually send it if they're married, send it to their spouses, while female migrants who still have children in their home country send the remittances to females who take care of the children. So if usually it would be a female family member taking care of the children while the mother is working abroad, and then the mother would rather send the money also to this person. These are, of course, depending on the context. And then the different in usage. Female migrants and male migrants use the remittances differently. Again, depending a bit on the context, but females tend to spend their money more on things that support the whole household, so education, healthcare, while the men use it more to invest. This has several factors, and again depends on the context. And the other thing is about the control. So if we look at the recipients, how much control do they have over the money? And this again depends strongly. So some female recipients really are the administrators of the remittances. In other contexts, they have limited control, but this depends if on individual factors, age, education, also the length of relationship, the household structure. So there are many things in play. And this brings me to my last point, to the limitations of the points I just mentioned. So obviously, gender and gender norms are different from country or region to region. So if we look at remittances, we should always do a gender sensitive research to take these differences into account, because we cannot generalize. And then there's also something that it is said that there's sometimes a bit of a bias in research about remittances related to gender. Since we have these gender stereotypes, and sometimes the research are a bit self-fulfilling prophecies and saying, okay, women always tend to use the money more on education and therefore maybe contribute more to development than men, but this might also be due to a bias in research. Okay, let's move on to digital services and how they can enhance final inclusion of women migrants and remittances recipients. We have, sorry, I'm just moving to the next slide. Yeah. So maybe a general note. So digital remittances are cross-border money transfers made over the internet by the migrant population to their families in home countries. So what are the advantages of digital remittances? Why do we even speak about this topic? So digital remittances have the potential to facilitate the shift from informal to formal channels. So this is a first important point. They can also contribute to a person's financial health, and financially healthy migrants and families can meet their current needs, absorb financial shocks, which is very important if we look back at the past years with COVID, the Ukraine crisis, the earthquake, how important it is to be able to absorb financial shocks. Then, of course, pursue financial goals, feel secure about their financial life. So all these kind of components are part of a financial healthy person, basically. Digital remittances providers have also driven down the costs of sending money. So while offline agents continue to add fees, online services have provided customers with significantly lower cost options. Again, here we see, if we think back, that women send money more often and smaller amounts. This fact in particularly benefits women. So if costs are lowered, women benefit from this even more than men, because they send more often. However, we still see the fact that especially migrants in general, but migrant women remain largely overlooked by service providers, by digital financial service providers. Sorry, I'm just checking to the next slide here. Yeah, so the service providers fail a bit to recognize migrants as a unique customer segment with specific characteristic, needs, want, challenges shaped by their migration journey. We all know how influential a migration journey can be, and this is often overlooked by these service providers. For example, many migrants still have difficulties to open a bank account in host countries. In some corridors, we still charge up to, or these service providers still charge up to 20% of transaction costs for sending sending money home to their families. And just a note, in the SDGs, we have the goal or the target of 3%. So just so you see how much that still is. And the question remains, I mean, we have 200 million migrants worldwide. Obviously, not all of them send remittances, and 48% of these are female, about 48%. So the question is a bit, why do these service providers still not consider the needs of their potential customers? Why do they not consider the needs of women, if we're speaking here of 48%? And this has, there is a UNCDF analysis to this, and they have identified 3 factors. So one is the one size fits all approach to remittances products where gender dimensions and migration aspects are not accounted for. So then obviously a second point is remittances products are primarily driven by the interest of the provider, the service provider, rather than the wants and aspirations of migrants and migrant women. And then the remittances industry remains largely male dominated with a limited engagement or visibility of women. And I mean, this is something we've seen in many other sectors with many other products. If we lack representation, the needs and wants of the group which is not represented, which is often female or which is often women and migrants as well, are not considered in an efficient way. And these practices I've just mentioned result in this mismatch between what they offer, the digital providers offer, and what migrants and migrant women need. And this is also why we have a limited adoption of digital remittances products by migrants and especially by women. So women and migrants tend to use digital remittances service to a lesser extent. So a key to this, and this is a recommendation you will hear quite often throughout this presentation, is to collect and analyze customers' data and transaction data disaggregated by sex, age, nationality, etc., etc. But then in a second step, and this is also something which is very important, is that these patterns observed should be complemented by a gender analysis that account for influence of gender roles and relations and aspects, including the relationship between the sender and the recipients. Let me maybe explain this with an example. So, sorry, here. So there is in Gambia, I'm bringing a small example from Gambia here, a bit far away from our region. There is a Ping Money. It's a remittances service provider, an online remittances service provider. And they worked also together with UNCDF and did a very specific analysis of the data, and then they also did a context analysis with a strong gender analysis integrated, and then they found out a couple of things and changed a couple of things in their products to address the specific needs of all migrants, which was for example, that they wanted to pay directly for specific products like school education. So they included this into their services, but this is all something they found out through this analysis. And they also found out in this broader analysis that some women tend to look to men for when it comes to technology and information. So which products to use, where it is good to invest, etc. So men in their family would be a bit the guide towards these kind of products. So what Ping Money did is that they started targeting more men by sponsoring football games, and football is the most popular sport in Gambia. So they did sponsorships of football games, which and football is popular for both genders, so men and women, but particularly men. And they saw that the number of male customers increased, but at the same time, these men then encouraged women to use these services. And these women, again, went to their female friends and recommended it. So through this snowball effect, starting with the man and the family, they also reached more women. And this is something they could only find out by doing both an analysis of the data and seeing that, okay, women do not use a lot of digital services because of a lack of information, because of lack of awareness of these services. So how do we reach these women? And in this case, it was via the man. Just an example of what this concretely means. I wanted to go to the next topic, applying. I'm just checking the time. Yeah, I'm moving towards the examples, and then we're done. My last point on this topic was applying a gender lens to digital remittances. And here I wanted to quote out of a study which looks specifically on how to design digital remittances services more gender and migrant centric. So driven by entrenched gender and social norms, the persistent gender gap in financial inclusion also plays out for women migrants, who account for half of all remittances senders globally, making remittances a gender equality issue. Here we come back to what I've said in the beginning, that this exclusion of women when it comes to the access to financial digital services increases inequality among men and women. So let's have a quick look at digital remittances with a bit of a gender focus. So again, I'm looking here at a UNCDF study of 8 million transactions and of financial remittances services. And again, digital remittances service, I apologize. And again, it was found out that depending on the channel, 9 to 39% digital remittances senders women remittances senders did not use digital services. And on the other side, the recipients, it was 22 to 43%. So you see that in some channels, only 9% of women actually use digital remittances senders services, which is really a very low uptake. Here, what they also found out is that the education level and the age plays a central role when we look at the usage of these services, specifically more educated and younger women. Senders and receivers use digital services. You can see here on the top receivers in cash, and then we have receivers digital, and then we have senders digital. And below you see, so dark blue is tertiary education. Then we have secondary, the purple. So you see here the differences are quite obvious. And the same is if we look at this data age in an age category. Okay, so let's move on to some practices and examples from the Sika region to conclude this presentation and leave the floor for some questions. I've brought 3 examples. 2 are still basically projects which are being implemented. So I can only point out a bit of what we're doing here and some first outcomes. And one is a project we've already concluded. Okay, so let's start off with the project Enhancing Socioeconomic Benefits of Remittances in Azerbaijan. It's an IDF-funded project, 2 years project. We're halfway in the project. And here specifically, I wanted to point out one activity. It's an assessment of remittances flows, practices, services, national legislation and policies, including relevant gender considerations. And in this project, or in this assessment, we have some gender-specific recommendations. So the assessment is not published yet, but it's already concluded. We're in the process of publishing it. And here we look at gender-specific recommendations on the uptake of digital remittances among women. So what can we do that women use more digital remittances? Because this was one outcome of the analysis that in Azerbaijan, women recipients do not use digital services widely, especially in women with low income. So one specific recommendation was that women with lower incomes have a social card for social security benefits, and the suggestion was that this card could be used to foster inclusion of women by making the experience with the card with digital services more attractive. So instead of only having the social security payments, we could offer complementary services like information sessions, education, financial education, discount initiatives, so that using a bank card is related to a positive experience and also a learning experience with financial inclusion. Obviously, another point was the specific needs of women should be considered when designing digital financial literacy campaigns. For example, include topics which are specific relevant to female households, female-headed households, like household keeping, spending, family budgeting, etc. So really think of what are the needs of these women who do not use the services. How can we make this more attractive? And then, of course, something I've mentioned before, the need of sex disaggregated data of cardholders and remittances recipients, so we can design policies and measures in a way that include women and reduce barriers. So this is the project from Azerbaijan. We have an initiative in Central Asia on a labor migration program funded by the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation. It's a 4-year project, and it's a large project, so I'm just focusing on the component of enhancing the development value of remittances. And here we have started a cooperation with UNCDF and banks. And we're just in the beginning of this cooperation, so hopefully in a year we have some data to show. But I wanted to point it out because it's specifically interesting, the cooperation with UNCDF, because UNCDF has a data lake house. So IOM will coordinate with partner banks to share specific data on a regular basis with this data lake house. It's and then within this data lakehouse, UNCDF can analyze the data and say, okay, from this specific region in Kazakhstan, I'm giving an example, we see that the percentage of women recipients use this much digital services compared to men. We see that in this region there is many migrants coming from the Russian Federation or sending money from the Russian Federation, etc. So it is much more detailed analysis, and then the banks can take up or design their products more effectively towards the users, and IOM can design initiatives targeting specifically the issues identified through this analysis, including gender issues, which brings me to my last point of why this is important in the Central Asian context. So this is the project I can tell you most about, or basically one study we've done within this project on the role of digital remittances in communities in the Russian Federation. So it was a study. I'm not going too deeply in how it was done. It was we looked at remittances transfers from Russian Federation to Central Asian countries and from Kazakhstan to Central Asian countries. It was a supply and demand side analysis, including interviews and a small-scale pilot intervention. And the role of digital remittances, let's have a look at the recommendations. And I'm, of course, focusing only on the gender-relevant recommendation here. So one recommendation or one outcome, sorry, was the problem appears to be more behavioral rather than structural. So this means that services, digital services are available and affordable. And many women also have, many men and women also have access to phones and internet. So it's more a behavior problem than a structural problem. A second outcome was that findings suggest that migrants tend to send money digitally, but the recipients prefer to receive it in cash. And then in the context specifically recipients, the majority of recipients are women, and the majority of senders from the Russian Federation are men. Migrants, senders are Central Asian migrants in the Russian Federation. Yes, and then the last relevant outcome to gender was that there is also a gender gap for using of digital services, with 64% of male respondents digital remittances services compared to 44% of female respondents. So again, we see the gap of usage in digital services, and then on the sender side, and then again that the majority of recipients is female, and they use less digital services. So this is all from my side. I've just touched upon these examples from Central Asia. Mainly Central Asia. Of course, this is a study you can read up on if you're interested. It's available on our website. Yeah, if you want to dive deeper into this topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. Very interesting presentation indeed, and again confirming that there is a lot of work to be done to ensure that the digital gap between the genders is indeed narrowed. Generally, I mean, you started off by giving us some very staggering examples of how much remittances contribute to countries of origin. The latest data that I have, and perhaps it may vary slightly, but it's more or less, I think, more or less the same, is that roughly speaking, 3.6% of the global population are migrants, and who contribute to roughly 10% of global GDP, which is not little at all. You shared with us that indeed it exceeds overseas development assistance by far. In some countries, it exceeds overseas development assistance and foreign direct investment combined. Especially in our region, there are a few countries where remittances outnumber by far foreign direct investment, so investment from outside, and overseas development assistance, which is the assistance received through bilateral and multilateral corporations. So remittances do play an extremely important role, and interesting also to see in your presentation that, not very surprising perhaps, that the remittances that go to some of the countries that you mentioned, these countries are also not necessarily gender champions or champions of gender equality, which again confirms the need for us to do more work on bridging that gap and closing and narrowing that divide. Of course, the higher level education, the higher the education, the more likely that you're But the more likely you are to use digital services, which again, not very surprising, but good to have it empirically evidenced, of course, that the higher the education, the more you're likely to use digital services, which of course has its pros and cons, as you mentioned as well, some of the cons being the high costs of those remittances. And thank you very much. And I open the floor for any questions. I got nudged by a couple of people as you were presenting. So if they want to take the floor, do we have any questions from colleagues right now? Please raise your hand I have a question from Gensi. So Gensi, over to you.
Hi, Amr. Do you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you
hi, Amr.
well. Maybe you speak a little bit louder.
Yeah,
And just for the colleagues
that
that don't know you, Gensi is IOM colleague from our office in IOM Albania. Over to you, Gensi.
Everyone. Thank you, Amr. Hi, Maria. Hi, everyone. Thank you for organizing these very interesting findings indeed. We've been working in Albania on remittances continuously, say from years now, considering that Albania has a strong legacy on migration, has almost 1/3 of the population abroad, and at its highest peak, the remittances counted for 14% of the GDP, although the decrease now around more or less at 12%. So a very important source of income. As compared to FDIs or ODIs. Then, without going to the discussion on remittances and their investments or their use, that's another pair of fruit. But I wanted to maybe say a little on the transfer cost, the lowering the transfer cost of remittances, which always is part of any discussion or any work that we do on remittances. You mentioned in your presentation that some operators at some concept or countries charge up to 20%. And while the target seems like a reachable dream, 3%. Whenever we were implementing remittance related project, there was always a discussion with money transfer operators or banks on lowering the cost of transfer for remittances, and there always was the rationale behind it for the business sector that okay, it's cost of transfers, networks between banks, and there implies the cost of work, which a series of factors that made that appear like almost impossible. And then I do want to believe that these 20% that you managed, the example of the 20% that you mentioned is not so right. So I would wish that the average is much slower and much closer to the 3%. But I was wondering whether is this really achievable? The SDG 10 targets, we find it also on the GCM because they are quite fully aligned. So is it realistic or is it over-ambitious? I mean, we've taken into account the business part, the business rationale, and its market in ways. It appears at a certain point that you cannot go beyond the limit because the market regulates itself. This first, whether the digital transfers innovation helps reducing really the cost, because if one would imply that banks are still in the background and some work is applied. And concretely, IOM, if I mean, you mentioned a couple of initiatives, but in particular for the lowering of transfer costs. Is there any practical example we can refer to from the work of IOM in trying to or successfully managing to contribute to bringing down the cost of transfers? Thank you.
Okay, so I mean, if the the 3% are a realistic goal. I mean, first of all, it's in some contexts, and specifically in Central Asia, the costs are, for example, not such a large issue. So in Central Asia, and colleagues, I see that there are a couple of colleagues from Central Asia can maybe confirm that they are already quite low. So this is not an issue, and this is why digital services are also being promoted, because they have the potential of reducing costs. I cannot say if we really will reach the 3% globally. I'm optimistic, but I'm also a bit realistic here. But digital services can definitely or have improved this. And I think what could also be an argument towards service providers is that if they target their services better to the migrants' needs, it will also be an uptake, because we know that still many migrants send their money through informal channels, so giving it to friends and families, and then obviously customers would increase, they would have more customers, so maybe this could be an argument, or it is an argument that is being used if you consider more the needs, and of course this again needs more research. In terms of examples, I don't have any specific examples now, but I can also look into this maybe with a bit more like a specific project which would be useful to you, who has specifically looked at reducing the cost, or basically talking to the service providers, or convincing the service providers to reduce costs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariana. Thank you for this. I had the perception from the presentation that you gave that the lead to take now, it's like on remittances, it's fostering and working around this digital transfers combined, as Amr rightly pointed out, combined with financial literacy or financial education, and eventually pitching for the banks which might not really be aware of the global or the overall size of remittances and their impact, and in particular of these gender dimension that they can make also useful with a business approach.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. This is something when we've talked to the banks in Central Asia, what we have, when we did this initiative with UNCDF, what we have been trying to point out is the benefit they gain from doing, first of all, these analysis, because they said, what is our added value? And of course, I understand the business side that they need an added value to these kind of projects. And the added value is that you understand your customers better and then can design the products in a better way, and this specifically for women, because of course we overlook them in this sector because men are the senders, but women are often the receivers, and women tend to be more and more also the senders. So this is something we used in the Central Asian context. And I see that that colleagues are here also. If you have inputs on this topic from your side, please come forward and say.
I mean, thank you very much again for the question. Thanks, Maria. And as other colleagues maybe want to raise their hand and chip in, please do. We're slightly over time, but I think we can spend another five minutes or so together on this important topic. I mean, one of the, and this is just an idea that just came to my mind or just now, is that one, how can we maybe talk to the service providers and what arguments can be given for their business model? One that comes to mind is that we can expect to have more migrants in the future, and I think that's, I mean, I don't think that's going to be that can't be argued, let's say, at least in the immediate future and in the near future. Maybe in the distant future it's a different thing, but again, business models are designed on immediate and near rather than the long term as well. So yeah, that could be an argument, is that we will continue to have migration. In fact, more migration, I believe, especially in our region, with countries that are yeah, declining fertility and increasing as well on the technology of mobility, proximity, EU accession, neighborhood, labor market agreements, bilateral or multilateral. So I think that's one argument. And the second one, especially on women, is I think that in our region, Southeast Europe, East Europe and Central Asia, we have more female migrants and male migrants, in fact, than the global average. So again, maybe something that could be leveraged to, as we speak, to service providers. Just thoughts on my side.
Absolutely, and maybe another thing which I think is relevant is that digital remittances can also, and this has been proven by a study specifically looking at women as well, also unlock broader financial inclusion of women. So if they start using one service, they might start using other services, which helps the provider. But of course, if we want to focus on our beneficiaries, but this could also again improve their financial health, and they could use saving and credits and insurance. And a study has shown that this already basically pushes women to use more of these services. So I think that is something which might also be relevant in these kind of discussions.
Indeed, it makes perfect sense. Yeah. Okay. Are there any other questions from the chat? So if not, we can wrap it up here. Just in the interest of time, because we took a little bit more time than anticipated. I don't see any. I do actually one from Yildiz. Okay, we'll take one last question from Yildiz. Yildiz, over to you.
Thank
and maybe
you.
just a quick
Hello,
introduction to the colleagues.
Yes, glad to see you all, and happy upcoming 8th of March. I just wanted to add maybe to this discussion that in fact people here in Kyrgyzstan, this was also this is supported by the studies that they tend to have women migrant abroad because like women are more responsible in sending their remittances back to their families. And very often migrants are the only breadwinners in their families. And during the COVID time, we made some rapid assessment, and actually it appeared that although like we expected that there will be a drastic drop in the remittances, in the volume of remittances, but to some extent it even increased, and that's because specifically many of them started remittances through the official channels, through the banks, like digital remittances, like avoiding unofficial sending money unofficial through taxi drivers, etc. And now, since everything changes, and with this crisis, the war between Ukraine and the Russian Federation, many migrants started looking, Kyrgyz migrants, I mean, started looking for diversification of the labor markets. And actually, if before the cost of remittance was in fact even lower than 1%, then now, since there are new markets, labor markets, and specifically the European, and like, for example, our Center for Employment Abroad under the Ministry of Labor, Social Security and Migration is having like a quota from the UK authorities for sending Kyrgyz migrants within organized migration. And of course, the cost of remittance is much higher. So like they don't tend to send money now, these remittances, but they will save and will come back with this money. So it's also some things that we have to think. And within exactly this SDC project, I think we will have very interesting additional information. We will study this, what is happening now in Central Asian countries where we have this diversification of labor markets and like are detaching more and more from the Russian Federation as the main country of destination. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree that that this could have an influence specifically on the costs since this diversification is a topic for all Central Asian countries. And of course, the main corridor, Russian Federation to Central Asia, the costs are quite low, but this will change, and this could become a new topic.
Indeed, something to bear in mind, and I think diversification, yeah, I mean, irrespective of the situation in Ukraine and Russia, as highlighted by Yildiz, I think that in general, we can, with quite some degree of certainty, anticipate a diversification in mobility across the region, across this region, but also other regions of the world. Again, for reasons that we may not necessarily have to discuss today, but I think we can expect more people to go towards Central Europe, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, also as a result, again, of labor market dynamics, mobility, fertility and natality and demographic shifts in general. But again, also economic patterns and expansion of Western Europe, European Union specifically. So yeah, I think we have to wrap it up here because we're really approaching 12 o'clock. So that's a good 15 minutes ahead beyond our time. And I thank very much the colleagues for being with us, and I thank you very, very much, Maria. And just before closing, I really wanted to give a shout out and maybe a reminder on the other events that we're doing along the same lines and spotlight sessions. Again, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, CTBTO, which is headquartered here in Vienna, has an event today at 2 o'clock. And it's CTBTO's approach and applications for addressing the digital divide, again, of course, seen from a gender lens. And that's today at 2 o'clock CET. You'll see a link in the invitation to all those events in the invitation that we sent out. So there's a link to their invitation as well, to their session. Tomorrow, there is the UNOV, United Nations Office in Vienna, together with UNODC, the Office of Drugs and Crime. We'll discuss at 2 o'clock as well, Vienna time, Geneva time, women and cyber organized crime. And 8th of March, we will be celebrating, of course, International Women's Day. There will be an event at the Rotunda, which is organized by IOM and UNODC. We will discuss other topics related to gender, but not only. So please come to the stand if you are in the UN main building. There will be a stand in the Rotunda starting from, I believe, 10 o'clock. And then on March 9th, it will be the concluding session of the spotlight sessions, of the series of spotlight sessions by UNIDO, the Industrial Development Organization of the UN, titled, again at 2 o'clock, Geneva time, Vienna time. And it's Women as Levers of Change for Transformative, Sustainable, and Inclusive Technologies. So again, 3 events, all of them at 2 o'clock. Today, March 7th and March 9th, with March 8th being in person through a stand in the Rotunda. So please join us if you can. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much again, Maria. Thanks to the colleagues for organizing this and for making this an interesting webinar. And again, happy Women's Day a couple of days in advance, and we'll celebrate again on March 8th. Have a good rest of the day, everyone. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
As well. Thank you. Thank you. Bye. Of course, here we are. Bye, Maria. See you in a bit. Are you downstairs?
Bye.
Are you on the 10th?
Are you in as
Okay.
well? Okay.
Yeah, I'm on the 11th. Yes. So I'll see you in a bit, maybe around or lunch or so. All right.
Yeah. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Thanks again, Maria. It was really good.
Yeah.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Thanks.